Okay, well, welcome to a panel for Alaska Book Week of some women writers in Alaska. And we're just going to have a pretty informal conversation here about where we are right now and kind of what's going on. And I'm Heather Lende, and I live in Haines, and I write obituaries for the local paper, and I've written 4 books that are all kind of based in Haines and my life here. The most recent one is about my term on the Borough Assembly, and it's called Bears and Ballots. Vera?
Goodness geesh. Vera Starbard, Sequoia Hatdoasak. I am a Tlingit and Dena'ina writer and editor. I'm on Dena'ina land right now. I'm originally from Tlingit, and I am the editor of First Alaskans magazine, the playwright in residence at Perseverance Theater, and what else am I? I'm a writer for Molly of Denali on PBS Kids and some other cool shows coming up. So it's been a busy time, but yes, glad to be here.
Erin?
Hi, I'm Erin Hollowell. I'm in Homer. We're on the Nilchik tribe land, which is Dena'ina and Supiaq. And I'm a poet. I have 2 books of poetry and 1 chapbook. And I'm the director of Story Knife Writers Retreat and the director of the Kachemak Bay Writers Conference.
Wow, and Dana?
I'm Dana Stabenow. I'm an Alaskan writer. I'm most known for crime fiction, but I've also written science fiction. And right now I'm writing historical fiction set in Alexandria in the time of Cleopatra. And I live in Homer.
Dana, can I just ask you, how many, I think of all of us, you've got the most volumes on the shelf. How many books have you actually written?
That's only because I'm the oldest.
I don't know.
Just wait. Just wait.
So how many though, really?
I think it's like 36. I'm not sure. I didn't know you were going to ask me that question, so I didn't count. Sorry.
Do you, and just while I have you quick, do you have a favorite of your series?
Originally I would set the science fiction, but not anymore. It's okay. That horrible cliche. What my favorite is the one that I'm writing right now, the historical fiction set in Alexandria in the time of Cleopatra. I am having the absolute best redshift limit time I ever had putting pen to paper, metaphorically speaking.
And I also want to ask Erin, because you just had a pretty exciting fall, because you've got a poem in Orion magazine.
Yeah.
And, that's hard to do, isn't it?
It's kind of hard to do. And it was kind of, some people are like, I want to be published in the New Yorker. And I was like, I want to be published in Orion. So that was a pretty peak performance moment for me.
And is that process, when you submit something to them, do they come back and forth and do any, like I don't know, but with poets, do they edit you at all? Or do they just say thumbs up or thumbs down?
Most literary magazines don't edit. Not poetry. Usually either get like, yeah, we want it, or nah, we don't want it.
And then something like Orion, I've noticed when I've looked at the submissions guidelines, they're often closed. So did you submit it during an open time, or did you know someone that said, hey, submit something, or how does that work?
The brand new poetry editor, Camille Dungy, said, I'm looking for poetry. Would you think you might have a few?
Oh, neat.
So, and I did.
Oh, wow. And then Vera, I'm just learning about some of your work, and I know about Perseverance and the isn't it called it's Native Pride and Prejudice? Is that one of your shows?
Yeah, it's one I'm in the middle of working on right now. We're actually about to have a showcase with the National Play Network. It's Native Pride and Prejudice in parentheses. It's been a lot of fun right now. Where it's one of 2 actually adaptations I'm working on. The other one is a Tlingit Christmas Carol, which will come to you this Christmas from Perseverance.
And then I read a discussion that you had, or an interview with you. I forget which it was, but about kind of a unique way that you decided to spend your research time and doing work that will probably lead into what we'll keep talking about here, but how it wasn't exactly a traditional way to go ahead and do some fine tuning on a play. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's actually this one and another one, Devilfish, which got produced last fall. We kind of worked on them at the same time. And I went with my mentor, Larissa Fasthorse, who just yesterday won a MacArthur Genius Award. I know that's what everyone calls it. She won it like a month ago, but it got announced yesterday. So I got to brag. I know her. Like I had anything to do with it. But she's been my mentor. She's a Lakota playwright who now lives in LA. She's originally from South Dakota. And she actually challenged me because I was just kind of uninspired with the usual process or the usual sort of contemporary process that we now kind of go through with playwriting, which is get a bunch of people in a room, read it, revise it, invite theater people to hear it, see what they have to say, revise it. And it was just kind of, yeah, we'll do that. And she's like, so if you could do anything in the world with any amount of money, what would you do? And it was immediate, like, oh, well, I'd go back to Prince of Wales Island, where I was born. I'd go to Devilfish Bay, where Devilfish took place. I would talk with people in villages, which is where Native Pride and Prejudice is set. And she's like, all right, let's figure out how to do that. And like within a month, we were on the ferry. We wrote a lot on the ferry. We had community readings with people who hadn't even seen theater before, were actually our actors who were reading the lines so we could hear them. We went to Devilfish Bay, which you can only get to by chartering a boat. So it ended up being amazing. Like sort of one of those once in a lifetime trips, and my husband was able to join us on a little bit of it. But it turned into two actually really great plays, I think.
And so that traditionally that time you were supposed to be spending writing and brainstorming and stuff, and instead you just took an experience and that, I'm assuming that made the play a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think it gave it a depth it definitely wouldn't have had before. And I think with my first play at Perseverance, I felt like we were trying to pretend like it was a Tlingit play. Like we were sort of putting up a lot of actors, about half the actors were Tlingit, but the ones who weren't, we were like trying to show them how to pretend to be Tlingit and the costume people to pretend to do Tlingit stuff. And in this case, it was like, well, let's not pretend, let's just put on a Tlingit play. We've been doing this for thousands of years. Let's just do it how we would have been doing it. And that was a lot taken from seeing, so one of the old village sites where you can actually still see some of the house posts that were up, or from people in the community. Like, it's so funny how we kind of get this gatekeeping, come against really this gatekeeping attitude in sort of the typical publishing or theater or whatever it is industry. And then you go into the villages and you're like, oh man, they're brilliant. Why am I not just asking them? And that's where it came from. I mean, so much of my revising for Native Pride and Prejudice, the bulk of it came from just people in the village going like, that sounds weird. Why'd you do that? Or them just talking and I totally just ripped off their dialogue of them actually saying words and I just used that.
Well, we were all talking just before we went live with this about what might be of interest to you watching this. And we were thinking that maybe just a little discussion of how we're doing in this COVID times and how we're managing to work or not work. And I like Vera's story because seems like that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of stuff that isn't really writing, but I'm hoping that it's in the bank for later. And I guess I'll go to, we'll talk to Erin and then Dana.
Boy, it's hard to concentrate finding between the upheaval in our culture right now and COVID and all of the impact to the day gigs I have. It's been pretty hard to write. I'm having to assign myself writing. So I'm that's what I'm doing. I'm assigning myself prompts and time limits each day. And for the last few weeks, I've given myself a social media tiny little box of time. So I don't doom scroll through social media endlessly. And it's been a time of thought more than production. And so I'm impressed by anyone who's producing, because everything feels, it's like trying to swamp out a boat that's sinking with a teaspoon. I feel like I'm making tiny little increments to what is a big thing. So I don't know if I'm coping. I'm reading a lot. I'm not writing as much as I'd like, but I am gathering lots of ideas. And maybe when the pressure's off, something will happen. Beautiful, like a miracle.
Dana, how about you? It sounds like you've got a project, and do you have deadlines on it, or are you just kind of?
It's not, the deadline is self-imposed. I want to have the rough draft done by the end of this month. I'm rough, and I say rough, not finished, rough. I have found that it has been a lot easier for me to write this book than it was my last book, which we just finished and is all complete and now is in good to go in February. I couldn't figure out why that was. I had such a horrible time forcing myself to do the work. I have a limit of pages every day. I'm supposed to write 5 pages every day. It was almost physically impossible for me to concentrate. And
So
Erin, I can't
your
tell you.
practice then is 5 pages every day?
Yeah, it's 5 pages every day. And Erin, I can't tell you how envious I am of you that you've been able to read. I haven't even been able to read. Normally, I read voluminously every subject, nonfiction and fiction. I'm constantly reading all the time. And I haven't been able to focus on anything. Right now, I'm rereading the Harry Potter books. Good God. I mean, I can't, for some reason, I just can't focus on anything new. And the book that I just finished was set in the present day. And now the book that I am writing is set 2,000 years in the past. And I believe that my only explanation is maybe I'm finding it a lot more comfortable for my psyche to inhabit, half a world away and 2,000 years ago than it is in the here and now, because the here and now is almost intolerable.
Yeah, or even do you think even some of the here and now, is it spilling into 2,000 years ago, or are you just really at a distance?
Oh yeah.
People getting sick
I have found many parallels, I'm sorry to say.
Now, Vera, how about you? Are you working like with the Molly of Denali work, or any kind of that stuff? I imagine there's deadlines and there's processes, and you just got to go no matter what's happening in the world around you.
Oh yeah, there's not a choice. Like if I want to pay bills, you just got to keep going. Fortunately, and probably anyone who knows anything I've done is probably not surprised that a lot of the way I work through trauma is by writing, and that's since I was little. My very first production was kind of autobiographical about the sexual abuse that I'd gone through, or kind of what happened from when it was discovered by my parents. And it just always has been that way. So I actually do a workshop called Healing Through Storytelling, which is just creating art to sort of work through your trauma. So fortunately, I feel like this is sort of, I've been writing a lot. I've been writing so much. Some of it though is, it's the work. It's great work, but yeah, the deadlines can be killer. I actually was doing an episode of Molly of Denali at the exact same schedule I was doing an episode for another show, unannounced, and it was literally like the same deadline, same days going through, and that was a little killer. We have a production coming out this Christmas, have to do that, and we have a showcase coming out in November, and then editing the magazine. So it's just kind of nonstop. But somewhere in there, everything that's been published in a book or otherwise has been my work with other people's. So I wrote this poem kind of at the beginning of the COVID everything, and then asked my dad if he could illustrate some stuff for it, turned it into its own standalone, my very first standalone book, which was a children's book. So it was kind of fun that my very first just totally standalone book to be published anyways. I've written books, but was a project with my dad, who's a wonderful Tlingit artist. So that's called Raven Steals the Toilet Paper. But it's
Great title.
yeah. Yeah. And it's basically about, I started thinking about like, how have we handled epidemics in the past? How would Raven handle it? Probably not well. So he goes in and he's like stealing Spam and stealing toilet paper. I don't know, it just ended up, it was definitely unplanned, obviously, but now I just kind of self-published this little project. So that one I think was, if there was any work that was sort of working through this time, it was that one, and that's been fun.
Yeah, I've been really distracted, but I think part of it too is it's been cool, like doing this, talking to you all. There's been a lot of Zoom interaction, and that kind of takes some time. I get a little nervous, and you get ready, and clean up and stuff, and tell everybody to be quiet and take the phone off the hook, and but then I'm like, well, what do you write about? And because what I write about is, usually stuff in my life, and I don't really want to write about Zooming. That seems really not that helpful to the world or interesting. And so I'm just hoping that, like you said, I have grandchildren that I was helping with a little bit of homeschooling, and I had some ideas about, and I hope it'll come to fruition. I don't know if it will or not, but working collaboratively with my 10-year-old granddaughter, who's a voracious reader and really smart and funny, and to write a book together that was sort of it'd be fiction. We talked about it, be this girl that comes to live with her grumpy grandmother or something, and that she writes part of it and then I'd write part of it off it, and just for fun. Like, it might never go anywhere, but it would give us each a deadline, and then we'd go back and forth. So that seems like about as close as I've got to something. And then of course I do obituaries, so people are still dying. Fortunately, nobody from COVID here in Haines so far. But I still have that. So I actually welcome those deadlines, because then I'm busy, all day doing stuff that I normally know how to do. But there seems to be a lot of care around the edges, more so than usual with my family. And even though they're all grown, and there's a lot of FaceTiming, there's a lot of texting, it's not really conducive to writing, especially because everything seems so urgent with all of them. And I don't want to share stuff that hasn't been sort of processed a little bit. I don't know. But as to both what Erin and Dana were saying, I've been reading in spurts, like reading 3 books in a row, and then picking them up, and then all of a sudden, like, I can't do anything but go outside and keep finishing reading, or go upstairs, and Chip's looking for me. Where are you? I'm just finishing this book, in the middle of an afternoon. I'm lying in bed reading, but it's fits and starts. It's not in a kind of a pattern that I usually have. So I don't know. I guess we're all just making our way. I think the one thing that has helped me is just trying to get at least some routine of exercise, being outside. I've been making more cookies, something. And I need a deadline. So I suppose I need to come up with a project, because I'm a little like Vera, and I know Dana's really good at self-imposed deadlines, and Erin's so busy that she doesn't have to worry about that. But I am totally deadline driven, and I do really well when I have one. And so I guess I need to come up with another project, and then I'll be back at it. But any other thoughts on that from any of you?
Well, do you think anybody who's listening is interested in process?
Yes.
You want to
And aren't we always? I am.
Well, something odd happened in this book that I'm currently writing. Generally, I write from an outline. I mean, it's not a stringent outline. It's just a paragraph per chapter. I generally know, the characters. I generally know where the plot is going. I generally know the end, and it almost never changes. It has a couple of times, but only a couple. And in this book, I am just writing from chapter to chapter and letting things happen. And I didn't do it deliberately. I didn't sit down and say, okay, let's see if this works or not. I just started writing and didn't stop to outline. So has anybody else had an experience like that? I mean, I can't explain it. I don't have any explanation for it.
Yeah, I think, well, in some ways, like I never write longer work anyways. But for the most part, I never even start writing until I know the ending. And there's been a few this time where like, I don't even know where this is going. Like, okay, let's just see. There's definitely been a difference in the writing. Right.
Do you think it's COVID? Vera, do you think it's COVID? Do you think that's having an effect?
I think it's definitely, so like when you're talking about reading, I am reading a lot, but I completely switch what kind of reading I'm doing. And definitely with the process as far as like my own personal writing, when you were talking about the 5 pages a day, it's like, oh wow, I had 2 pages a day first thing when I wake up before I do anything else, and then better writing later. And I realized when you were saying that, it's like, oh, I'm not doing any of that. Mine is just sort of this free for all, like whatever. Maybe it is. I honestly, until you said that, I was like, maybe it is. I haven't even, I don't know, I'm just doing it and not even thinking about how different the process is right now. Right now for me. Interesting. I'm going to ponder that.
I'm going to think about it too. Because I just realized this like last week, and I thought, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but it's working, so I'm just going to keep going. You don't argue with it. You don't argue with this when it goes this way.
No, but I've always admired your work because you are so disciplined, and the both of you just said that you don't even start anything till you know how it ends. I'm like the complete opposite. I never know how it ends, and I just go and I figure it out as I'm going, and I get rid of a lot of it once it's all sort of there and I know where it is. But I discover the story as I write it down, and I'm wondering if maybe my COVID reaction is that because there's no way of discovering what it is as I'm in the middle of it. Everything is happening so quickly and the changes are happening that it's sort of throwing off my usual mojo, because I can't, but by the time I think I'm going in one direction, something completely upends where I was, and that's no longer really something to share or to write about, because it's already old news or old, there's something else, because it's so rapid in the daily cycle of changes, both personal, family, community, and then of course in the whole world. Every day it seems like the message is different. And but I also think that it's I think it's good not to be too hard on ourselves. I keep trying to remind myself just to be nice to myself. And okay, I've read something, I've written something. I've been writing more letters, like actual letters, and mailing them to people. I think one of the best things I wrote during this time was a letter to the mother of one of my childhood friends who had died this summer of cancer, that I hadn't seen Janice, since we were little kids on Ruth Place. But I, had heard the news from my parents or whatever, and I didn't know when it happened what to even say. But I spent the better part of a week writing that letter and fixing it and editing it, and just for them, and that, then I felt like, well, there, I did something that, and I think as writers, that's a great tool that we all have. We can send somebody a letter, we can compose a pretty good email instead of just a, hey, hi, stop, go, bye. And that's something.
I have a friend, another writer, naturally, Lori Rader Day, and we were talking a little bit about this. She wrote a piece in the Sisters in Crime, the international organization Sisters in Crime, for their newsletter, talking about writing in the time of COVID. And she said, if you find yourself angry, she said, write your rage. So I thought, you know, I found myself getting enraged a lot, and I think of her all the time now, because I have on my desktop a little document that says write your rage, and whenever I get to the point where I get another piece of news and I think the top of my head is going to like really lift right off this time and just like boil over all of my friends and family and social media, I'll go write your rage, and I'll write my rage down, and then I'll save it, and then I'll put it away. And I bet you money that some of that stuff winds up in a book someday. But right now I have found it to be a really useful tool.
Erin, you're nodding your head. I mean, do poets write rage, or do they write truth and beauty, or do they write all of it?
They write all of it, but I think part of the reason that I'm having such a hard time writing is that I feel the enormity of everything. And I feel like, what's my teeny tiny little, like I'm a 55-year-old white woman. What do I have to add to this? And I think I think it's hard for me to wrap my head around the enormity. The other day on the Facebook, on the Book of Face, you know, it says, what are you thinking? And I just wrote, I'm thinking about 200,000 plus people dead. I'm thinking about 36 times the number of people who live in Homer gone. And the enormity of that was, I think that when I sit down and I get ready to write, I'm like frozen. I can't get it out. And so I think that that's part of, you know, I've been reading young adult fantasy, not Harry Potter, but
that is young adult fantasy, Erin.
but just as a chance to like, ooh, I gotta unplug a little. I read The Water Dancer, and that book, just, you couldn't be anywhere but in that book. What a gift that was. I mean, it was an intense, sad book, but what a gift to be in that world for a while. I thought, yeah, I think it's really hard right now. And it's hard to balance the day-to-day things that we have to do now with dealing with emotionally with that, what everything is happening, and with our art. I think all of those things, I'm like with Heather, I'm like, oh, you did your work today. Oh, you're such a good girl. Go have a cup of ice cream.
Well, Vera, you writing through trauma, and really, really tough personal trauma. And then if you give workshops and that, what are the kind of things that you advise people to do when they're doing that? I mean, you know, again, I think there's all different levels, but you may have more. It sounds like that you've thought about this and worked through this a lot. And any advice?
Yeah, I mean, when I kind of do the whole workshop, I give 3 examples of telling my story, so I mentioned Our Voices Will Be Heard is the play that was kind of semi-autobiographical about the discovery of sexual abuse. But then I show a painting that I do it's the same story. And then I show this sort of activity. It's called the River of Life, and you can do it different ways, but it's a little bit more for the left brain people, how to kind of get stuff out in metaphor. And it's all the same story. Like, there's no one medium you do. We actually, when I do the workshop, they choose between 3 mediums. And it's just tell it. What does that mean to you? Sometimes it's easy to have a little prompt. So like for the writing prompt, because writing actually, more than any other medium, freaks people out the most. Like, it just scares so many people, because we've always had these rules around how you're supposed to write, what you're supposed to write, how not to do it is usually the rules, you know. And so the only rule is, when you write this little short story about your life or your story, whatever that means to you, one of the characters has to be an animal. One of the human characters has to take the shape of an animal. So it brings a little bit of distance to what you're kind of going through. So you're sort of forced into this metaphor, and it's something that you can look at as you're going through it, but it's not you going through it. It's this animal, or, you know, it's not your abuser. It's an animal. It's a fox. It's a bear. And we've gotten extraordinary things from almost always. It's the people who say, oh, I can't write, that I kind of encourage to write, because their stories end up being the best every single time. So some of it is like a prompt like that. It's actually probably my favorite prompt. But some of it is just doing it, of not being afraid. With the painting, the rule is you paint it. It can't have words on it. And you don't explain it. Don't justify it to anyone. Don't feel like you have to, you know, make this a story in words. It's just the visual. So there are a lot of activities kind of on, if you look up art therapy, there's a lot of activities on there. I used to have it on my website. I should put it up, but I had a lot of resources. I'll try and put them up today. So verastarbard.com, go to that. I'll put those back up. And they're just little exercises that you do, not even every day, just when you're feeling it, when you're in the middle of it. If you're feeling really anxious, the best things to do are more tactile, like painting or crafts of some kind. If you're feeling, yeah, like if you're feeling really stressed, a lot of people don't think it's art, but a coloring book, that's not sort of a creative art. It's a very meditative kind of art. If you really just kind of don't even know what to go through, honestly, like to me, that's what you write, like, and let it come out. You don't have to know the ending, just let it come out. So those are some of the things I do. Like I do a lot of it. I bake is a totally, totally great form of art, the culinary art. It relaxes me. Some people it stresses out so much. Like, baking stresses them out. So if you get stressed out thinking about whatever you want to do, don't do that one. Some other one. Yeah, and honestly, some of it is just being a kid. Like what are the things that you love doing in art class or in school? Go do those. I love paper cutting. I remember it so clearly. In 5th grade, we had an art teacher come in and do paper cutting, and you fold it and flip it. And I've been kind of wanting to do that again.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think too, the interesting thing about even just trying to capture some of these feelings or to make poems about them, or stories or essays or novels for that matter, where this is somewhat infused, is that, you know, when people are struggling or when times are hard, the first thing they really do is start to look for a poem to read or a song to sing, or, you know, at a funeral, you're always thumbing through to find the right piece to share. But likewise, you know, with joy. And so it's not a bad idea to have some of these things ready, because these are the times when people look to writers, or to even have a book that somebody wants to pick up. I was going to say that I have a friend who's reading Dana Stabenow mysteries again, and she's just with Kate Shugak and going there, and it's making her very happy. But you know, the idea of the fact that we bring comfort for what we do, or even you know, watching cartoons, PBS cartoons, a show like Molly of Denali has, you know, made a lot of kids feel good. And that's important, I think. And I don't know, you know, so spending some of every day just trying to have some sort of a response to this, so that someday it might be something that people look at and either say, you know, oh, that's right where I was, or thank you, or, ooh, I hope you're okay now, or whatever it is, right?
Well, there's a painting that whenever I look at it, it's actually one of the ones I use as an example, because I remember, like, that was a bad place. That was a really bad place, but it actually makes me feel pretty good about where I am now.
Oh, yeah.
if you're in the middle of something now, not only does it help to kind of get it out right now, but it gives you perspective. In this case, I think I painted it 15 years ago or something. And it goes, wow, I've not only feel better now, but wow, I've grown since then. I don't even struggle with that specific thing anymore. I struggle with other things. But,
Well, and Erin, what about, the idea of online sort of writers workshops or talks and stuff? I mean, you're involved with Kachemak Bay and also with Story Night, both which, with distance right now. I mean, is that something that you find people are hungry for, or that it's something to organize, or how's that? Is that
I
a thing
I-
these days?
I fear we're reaching saturation for sure. At a certain point, like I literally could do something like this
Mhm.
every day. Like so many people are asking and I think part of that stems from nonprofits and places like libraries and stuff saying we have to still be relevant. So we have to do all this stuff to show you how relevant we are, rather than just trusting that you're relevant, you're fulfilling a need. But I do think that this is providing people with opportunities they didn't have before. So it turns out that the Kachemak Bay Writers Conference in 2021 will be virtual, no in-person component. And the first thing I did was turn back to the advisory committee and say, okay, what can we do? What can we bring to them that we couldn't before? How can we make this accessible in a way that it might not have been before? How can we turn what, has me kick in the dirt a little into something beautiful, And, Dana's heard me say this about Story Knife. If we didn't think that giving women an opportunity to get away from everything and devote time and respect to their own work was important before this, we know it now because we hear how desperate those women are to come, how much they want it and how much they're waiting for it. So I think that this time has shown me that it's a double-edged sword. Everything online, after a while, I'm like, just close the computer. But also, holy moly, we're getting really a chance to interact with people we never would have gotten a chance to interact with before. And also, we're seeing that the arts are important, that theater is the way we see ourselves, that poetry is where we go when we hurt, that good novels take us someplace that we need a solace, a place out. And man, anytime now if somebody wants to cut funding to the arts, I'm like, all right, you sit by yourself in a room during the pandemic. So
Dana, what are you thinking?
What was the question?
Well, it wasn't really. I was just sort of, like the value of these different ways of communicating or being, or where we're going with things like Story Night for Kachemak Bay, if they're more relevant now.
I'm with Erin in that they are more relevant, infinitely more relevant. They were relevant before. They're infinitely more relevant now. I mean, I could say I don't want to be negative. I don't want to talk about the bad stuff that has come from this upheaval in our society. I don't want to focus on that, but there's a lot of it out there. And I think that it makes it more necessary for the arts to step up and reflect what is happening back at ourselves so we don't forget, so that we are mindful, so that we are caring of each other, so that we reach out to help each other when we can. And yeah, if that means me writing a book that I'm really enjoying, that I'm pretty sure a reader is also going to enjoy, you know what? I'm doing my part. I'm feeling, I guess, relevant. I guess, I hope.
No, I think that's true. And Vera, how about you? Because, live theater obviously isn't happening the same way. but you're all still creating in full speed ahead. And especially the situation now, I know we were talking earlier about just especially for women during these times that are, with the kids or the grandparents or whoever, they're all doing a lot at the same time. And the idea of a retreat when this is all done sounds pretty good for a lot of us.
Yeah, I was actually supposed to be in the very first wave at Story Knife, and it was, I understood, like when it was canceled, I was like, I understand, I think we could have gotten away with it, like it would have been fine. And then like a week later, I was like, wow, that was the right decision. At the same time, like, boy, could I use that, especially right now. And actually I was supposed to do that, and then again, my mentor offered me space down in LA to go before I was doing this other workshop down there. And both of those, I think about those a lot. I'm just like, wow, what would a space not filled with other people? You can't even sit in a cafe right now. That sounds wonderful right now. I'm about to like bust into the Story Knife cabins. You see,
They're waiting.
yeah.
They're waiting for you, Vera. They're waiting for you.
You see a light
You'll
on
get here. You'll be here.
But I will say, like, while personally I would love those things, and that's kind of one of the big bummers. Wow, what a time to get accessibility where there hasn't been before. I have had so many people in villages especially ask if a play's been recorded, can they see it that way? Is there something they can have? I have one of my plays in a textbook, but it's $60 for the cheap version of the textbook. It's just not accessible. And right now I think there's like 4 classes that are teaching my work, because I'm able to kind of give, I won't explain all of it, but I can basically, like, they can get those texts right now, or different texts that aren't in textbooks yet. We're making an Alaska Native textbook, a collection of full-length plays, to have that accessibility, to be able to go, hey, here's something that's not crazy expensive and you can just have and perform these. And theater, I'm really proud to be a theater artist right now. I was kind of an accidental playwright. Like, my intent was always books, and I fell into theater because I was trying to, I just finished my first book and I thought the dialogue wasn't great. So I did this exercise through the Alaska Native Playwright Project of learning dialogue. And like, the rest is history now, I'm hooked. But man, for an industry that has such a long history with epidemics, pandemics, when those things happen, they're the first things to close. And they're going to be one of the last things to open. We're not going to see live theater until the very last stage, for the most part. And yet, unlike some other industries or other people, other businesses, whatever, it's not even really been a question. It was never this sort of fight and try and talk people into it. It's just something that was understood in the industry. We can't be open right now. So what else can we do? That shift was so fast to what else can we do? And the early stuff was a little rough. I've done actually a lot of short Zoom plays. It was pretty rough, but we were just trying to kind of work things out. And I was so proud of all of these theater artists, not just the writers. I think the playwrights felt a little pressure to write stuff so literally actors could still be employed, directors can still be employed. Like, that's been a pressure I've felt. But all of them have come up with wonderful things. The one we're producing right now this weekend, the actors are their own makeup artists, their own set designers, their own, we try and help them with costume, but they're still the ones that gotta, fit it and make it work. We're asking an awful lot of actors, and they're really coming through, or directors. So Madeline Sayette, she's a director that's doing Tlingit Christmas Carol. She keeps like, I'm the worst Zoom directors. Like, you're like the first in your field. Like, this whole, like, all the directors right now are the first in their field. We're creating a whole genre right now of entertainment. It's sort of somewhere in between live theater and TV. We don't even know what we're doing. You're doing brilliant. She's actually the best I've seen yet. So I'm glad I have her. But I don't know, I'm so impressed and so proud of the creativity that's coming out of creative people right now. Not just in theater, but everywhere. Like I know it's rough, and I have zero judgment for people who can't create, because there's certainly a lot of things I'm not doing right now that I used to. But the ones that are, I don't know, I'm really proud to be an artist. I'm really proud to be a theater artist right now. I'm proud to be an Alaska Native artist. There's a really big resurgence in Indigenous writing specifically right now, and I'm really proud to be a part of that.
I think one of the pluses of the whole pandemic and Zoom, and then also the rise of all these questions about how our society is, and all the systemic racism and all of that. What it's doing in Alaska a little bit is bringing people a lot. I think bringing us together, because in some ways the arts were a little snooty. Like you couldn't see a show unless you went to Anchorage, or you might not be able to go, you might not meet those writers unless you could travel to that conference. And these things, travel in Alaska is so expensive, and it's also difficult to leave home, and you don't know when you'll be back. And now I'm seeing this with a lot of library stuff that I'm doing. I'm doing this Alaska Reads thing, and before, I've hosted people, they had to get to Haines, and you had to get them the plane ticket and get them the ferry schedule and put them up in your house and eat, and then they had to get dressed and go to the library and give the big talk with the people who could get to the library that night, and the reception following or whatever. And now it's like, go to Antioch, just boom, Zoom, here we are, and talking like Vera said, to writers, adults, children, teachers there, in a much more comfortable and really personal way. So you're also not just talking to sort of the bigwigs in the room. You're talking to everybody equally, and I think that may change a lot about people's involvement in the arts and what we see as sort of the hierarchy in Alaska when it's as accessible as it is to everyone, and everyone's just relaxed a little bit. Even the radio stuff that I do, you couldn't do it unless you had a someone just came in my door that unless you had the right link, the hookup to the station that had this super duper sound or whatever. And now everybody's on their phone and nobody cares if it's not quite perfect. So
I definitely have a hope after the summer, because there were some eyes opened. Certainly I think it's one thing, because I do a lot of work in anti-racism or equity, and at some point you're like, oh, yeah, it's been there. There's a lot of it's so racist right now. It's like, oh, that's been there. We felt it. I think the eye-opening thing that has come with some of the video software, the phones, everyone has the camera in their hand, is it's hard to deny when not only is it there in front of you, like Rodney King was filmed once, but most other incidences were not. When you see it again and again and again and again on the same day from across the nation, it's really hard to deny that that's something that's happening, that's a problem. And I think some of the sort of resurgence that we're seeing right now in Indigenous art, and I should actually note, it's not a resurgence of Indigenous people doing art. We've been doing it. We've been here, and definitely I've felt gatekeeped out of certain places, and I know the other Native artists, have felt that too. And a lot of that's how we get our own spaces. We create our own spaces for it because we're not feeling welcomed in other places. I think the resurgence of outside interest, Indigenous art, and just artists of color in general, I have a lot of hope. It's a rough time right now, but I see so many eyes being opened and so many organizations having that sort of first awareness that it's not this other people that are gatekeeping, that they are in fact a lot of them, the gatekeepers. Theater itself is heavily, not only white, it's heavily white. It's also heavily upper middle to upper class. So the audiences that you have are going to be generally much wealthier and much whiter. And to have, like, knowing that as an artist, that's who my audience will be, is interesting. And the last show that I did is like, forget it, I'm doing this for Tlingit people. And I know that mostly it'll be white people that are going to see this, but this is for Tlingit people to see their own art in a space that other people are pouring resources into and advertising. And wouldn't you know, it was a pretty good commercial success too. It was like, who knew, if we do our art well and you're kind of opening up the space to not only be a piece of art that is by an artist, but the process of that play was much more indigenized. Actually creating it, we went to how we've been creating plays for thousands of years. And wouldn't you know that it was a success. Like, we know how to do this. And that's I think with TV writing, with textbook writing, with journalism, the surprise of so many people that I've heard to my face, they're like, wow, you guys are actually really sophisticated. That's a terrible compliment. That's terrible. Like, but it's sort of this, it speaks to this, well, then I know what you think of us. And here I am, I'm just gonna prove you wrong. I'm just gonna do really good work and prove you wrong. And I think that's a lot of the work that Native artists are doing right now, whether they're very outspoken about equity or racism. Literally just creating that art and doing it well is this huge megaphone sort of speaking to people who've never quite realized we honestly exist down. I know they did a survey and 40% of US citizens believe Native American people don't exist anymore. Like, literally, we're just trying to prove we exist sometimes. I don't think that's that high in Alaska, but certainly down south.
Wow. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I don't know if Erin or Dana want to say anything that might shed any light on these times or why we do what we do.
It's sort of apropos, but sort of sideways of what Vera just said.
Mhm.
One thing that I've been made aware of, I was aware of it before, but I'm aware of it on a visceral level now, is that the smaller communities, particularly in this state, don't have access to, don't have broadband. There, just don't have broadband. And this new art form that Vera is now in the middle of inventing has no way to get to some communities because they don't have the broadband. And I think that this is going to sound weird. I think that's a very good thing. I think it's a very good thing that our attention has been brought to it so that when we get on the other side of this, that we can direct some attention and some money in that respect to bring everyone online so that we are all more in contact than not. I don't know if I said that very well, but I feel very passionately about it.
So that very, yeah, I remember actually I used up, in one day, I'd used up my auntie's entire allotment of broadband or, you know, internet. And I didn't know. It was like me, my spelled Anchorage.
I know.
Watching videos, whatever. And she's like, so it's done. We have none for the rest of the month. I was like, oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, so yeah, I hope that can be brought attention to.
Yes, and money thrown at it and addressed in an effective manner. Yes.
Erin, any last thoughts? I know it's kind of like a put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that this, yeah. Well, no, I do think that this time is, in some ways has been an enforced pause, which allows us to no longer go, well, someday when we have money and time, we'll make sure there's, you know, an equitable representation of people here. Now is the time. Actually, like years and years ago was the time, but it has, I hope, enabled people to really forefront being proactive about things. I know it has been for me to not be like, gee, wouldn't it be nice if this happened, to saying, what's it going to take for this to happen? And to talk to the people who, instead of saying, I'm going to give you this, go to the people who haven't been in the room and say, what do you need? What can you give? How can we come together and make this happen? Not, I'm going to give you this present. And so I think it's painful and difficult, but really hugely important.
Yeah, I think what I want to say, and I think it crosses all of us. I was thinking about, I got a chance to meet Brian Doyle, who's was a writer and essayist poet from Portland, and at the Skagway Northwards Writers Conference. And he said something that I think is important to just remind all of us out there who are writers, storytellers. And he said that we're story catchers, that it's our job to go out and catch the stories, because those stories carry everything. You know, that's our culture, it's our nutrition. Without stories, we're not human beings. And so, you know, no matter how you do it and in what way you do it, I think that's the, you know, now more than ever, it's critical. And, you know, to have as many story catchers out there, catching as many as they can and returning them out to us so that we can both, you know, read them and share them. And I know that this is, you're all very busy, and I think it's really great that we got to talk. I'd kind of like to hang out with you again when this is all over, like in a real room, and maybe eating something and drinking something.
Works for me.
Okay, thanks. And I guess I'm gonna leave it to Vera to figure out how to turn this thing all off.
Thank you, everyone.
It was great to meet you, Vera, even virtually.
Goodness, it's good to talk with you all, and hope to do it again.